the way we got full stuff of the plantation was very interesting. You would take a certain number of acres of land based on the size of your family. And so in 1952, my dad decided for the 53 year that he wanted to have, let's say, 10 acres. Okay? So it turns out that year, the cotton crop first plant was killed by frost. So my daddy went out and walked over his land that he had already agreed to farm, and he saw that, okay, the boss wanted him to plow up the cotton and replant, but he said no, because he said that cotton would be okay, it would recover. Make a long story short, that year my dad had 22 bales of cotton on those 10 acres. The most in the history, I guess, of that plantation. Okay? When he settled, at the end of the year, you had to pay your debts. The boss man sold the cotton, and he subtracted his debt from that. And my dad wanted for $1,800, but the boss said he owed him half of that. So not only that, the cotton was $3,600, my dad got $1,800, and then he took the expenses out of that. So my dad gets $800. Okay, let me get to the point. The next year, my dad made the mistake of going to the boss, the owner of the plantation, and saying, I won't call her name, I would be able to help your grandson to, farm, give him pointers, because my dad, had said, don't plow it up, and he did, and he made the most cotton. Okay. In the winter of 1954, that next year, as a punishment, the grandson fenced our house in and put the cows in our yard. Okay. Our house was fenced in, and we had Hereford cows with a bull. And there's a fence around our house. We came home one day from school and there's this fence, and we were scared to death. Okay. So these cows were around our house all winter long, well into spring. That same year, my mom told my dad that we had to move. That was in 1954. Okay. And that was a really bad year for us, but to get to the point, I saw my mom crying a lot of times that summer and that fall because she didn't have food to feed us. Okay, and so she said, we're going to move. And she did move in 1955. The next year we made a crop, but it wasn't very successful. And we moved on January the 10th in 1956 from Foote, Mississippi to Greenville, Mississippi. And we lived with my grandfather, my mother's father, over in Speedway Addition. And from that point on, we basically were on our own in terms of trying to get a job. And my point was, they had a high school. You see, the school we could go to now was a high school. It turns out that we would catch the bus right up from the house where we lived with my grandfather, Edward Hezekiah Ross, my mother's father. And the white people didn't want us catching the bus there. Now, this is in 56, winter, because we moved and got there January the 10th. We started school maybe a month later. Well, they didn't want the black kids catching the bus there. And so we had to start walking down maybe a quarter of a mile in order to catch the bus. Now, to put that into perspective, in 1955, the last week of August, Emmett Till had been killed in Money, Mississippi. Okay, now remember, this is 1955. And this incident was in 1956, about 5 months later. They didn't want to. So quite naturally, you couldn't argue because my brother and I were black and my sister was black. And so therefore, we didn't want to create any issues. So we would just walk down there maybe a quarter of a mile because the black bus wouldn't have to stop in the white neighborhood. It would stop in the black neighborhood, okay? And so that was basically how we got from the plantation to a place where they had a high school. maybe there's a blessing in disguise there, but that's what happened. Okay, and to add a little bit more to that, in 1956, we were still living with my grandfather, and I had to go to the uptown along Old Leland Road up to get downtown. And when I was walking along Old Leland Road, I saw two little white kids in diapers, boys. They must have been twins. They came walking out to the road where I was, this Old Leland Road. And they walked up to me, and one of them hit me on my knee and called me a nigger. They couldn't have been any more than 18 months old. And I just out of reflex did this, and one of them fell down. And I started running because you remember Emmett Till had just been killed a year before that, and he got off. His killers got off. So I said, oh my, I'm in trouble. I just took out and started running. And I was looking back. So at that point on, rather than going the way I did, I would go down into the black neighborhood, cross over to the railroad track,